The campuses of big tech companies are usually sprawling endeavors found in suburban settings in places like the Bay Area and Puget Sound. But today I want to take you to the north end of downtown Seattle, home of Amazon HQ, and talk about the upsides and downsides of reinventing a place like South Lake Union as a massive tech hub. I'll also dig into some research that helps illuminate why a place like South Lake Union is so interesting and possibly disturbing, including some fun new vocabulary that I know you're all going to enjoy. Today, a very nerdy tour of Seattle's South Lake Union, but first let's define the area we're talking about. There doesn't seem to be exact agreement on what South Lake Union is, but generally it's I-5 on the east, State Route 99 on the west, Denny Way to the south, and, of course, Lake Union to the north. There are remnants of what this area used to be, largely manufacturing and wholesale with not a ton of residential. And I'm not going to try to make the case that places like this should be frozen in amber. Seattle is one of the fastest growing cities in the US, and there are massive employment and housing needs in near the heart of the city. But as we explore the area and I talk through some of the research, it's worth asking whether this is all developed in a way that's as beneficial to the city as it could have been, and what we can learn from the path Seattle has gone down. First of all, let's acknowledge that South Lake Union has added a ton of housing in the last decade plus. I'll introduce this paper properly later in the video, but it includes a table that lays out some of the income and population changes in the census tracts that roughly map to South Lake Union. Between 2009 and 2018, population more than doubled and median household income did as well, even as that number rose much more modestly in the city overall. I took the liberty of updating this with the latest census numbers, population up another 7,000 in the last 5 years, which I think is good news. Median household income up another 30% or so, probably good for the city's tax base, maybe problematic in some other ways. I want to spend a little more time here immersing you in the built environment and the corporate vibe of South Lake Union, but later in the video we will come back to the question of demographics and how grafting a tech campus onto the heart of your city plays out. The prevailing income's probably related to the way employment types in the area have changed over the past couple decades. There's been biotech and cancer research here for a long time, but the influx of tech jobs is relatively new. Google now has a foothold right at the edge of Lake Union, but the dominant presence in the neighborhood is Amazon.com. First of all, let's acknowledge that you can embark on an Amazon-approved tour of the Puget Sound HQ campus. This isn't really my style, though. I admit I was intrigued, but I didn't want to subject you to any more Amazon propaganda than you're already going to get. The epicenter of the Puget Sound HQ actually isn't even in what I would call South Lake Union. It's south of Denny Avenue in what's been called the Denny Triangle since forever, but it still has the South Lake Union branding all over it, so what are you gonna do? Ground zero of Amazon.com, for my money, is this block, which includes an architectural wonder that is officially called the Spheres, but locally goes by a different name that I won't repeat here, but references certain delicate bits of the company founder's anatomy. I promise I'm not trying to be gross, but we have to be real about what this actually looks like. So in this video, it's gonna be very easy to dunk on Amazon, and I won't shy away from that, but I do think it's important to acknowledge some positive aspects of the Puget Sound HQ. Like the fact that they invested in downtown Seattle at all, instead of some godforsaken suburban office park, is notable. And you can be cynical about it, and you probably should be, but it's not just cosmetic. Amazon really has doubled down on urbanism in a lot of ways, like the fact that employee bike parking is very front and center in a lot of the buildings all over campus is pretty cool. Okay, here's the paper I want to share, and it's from the journal Digital Geography and Society, and it's called The Urban Tech Feedback Loop, a Surveillance and Development Data Walk in South Lake Union by Dillon, Mahmoudi, Anthony Levenda, and Alicia Sabatino. I'm not going to quote from it extensively, but it has a lot of illuminating things to say about the way tech companies throw their weight around to influence urban planning and infrastructure investments, and why they do it. Mostly though, I want to give you some fun new terminology, and first on the docket is platform urbanism. This is a whole emerging area in urban and social science that studies the growing influence of digital platforms in shaping the design, experience, and governance of urban spaces. So this plays out in things like the chief developer in the South Lake Union area being Paul Allen, RIP, and his Vulcan Inc. being heavily involved in advocating for the streetcar project, negotiating with the city of Seattle on zoning changes in the area like height limits and floor-to-area ratio allowances, affordable housing provisions, and urban design standards and requirements. According to theory, platform urbanism aims to reshape cities into spaces designed for surveillance and commodification, tracking lifestyle and consumption preferences, and locking consumers into habits and patterns of desire that make it easier to secure compliance with tech companies' preferred labor processes on the production end, and promotion of distinct market niches on the consumption end. Or more simply, the paper cites Marx and Engels' observation that capitalism reshapes the world after its own image. Okay, so not only is the idea of platform urbanism pretty academic, I think you also have to say it presents a pretty cynical view of the way the world works. And maybe it's a correct view, but can we also just admire how gorgeous some of the infrastructure in South Lake Union is? I already showed you how Amazon puts employee bike parking front and center, but the area also has an extraordinarily high density of really high quality protected bike infrastructure. I guess maybe I should call it micro-mobility infrastructure because I also observed the highest density of dockless bikes and scooters I've ever seen in any city I've been to since I started this channel. But micro-mobility is kind of a mouthful. I'm still waiting for better terminology for all this. South Lake Union also goes extremely nuts on green infrastructure like bioswales and stormwater filtration, with built-in urban design features, mostly skateboard hostile. Curb space management is a huge deal here. There are places where you're not even allowed to get picked up or dropped off during lunchtime because the space is reserved for burrito taxis. But the urban design and public spaces, or maybe quasi-public spaces, in South Lake Union, especially around Amazon properties, is absolutely A-plus stuff in my opinion. And it's not just infrastructure. There's a lot of programming to activate the spaces. Amazon.com wants to make sure their employees have ample opportunity to polish their cornhole skills and manage their potassium intake, but all this stuff is open to the general public in a way that doesn't necessarily happen on the campuses in Silicon Valley. It's not lost on me that there's a huge irony in that this is a company whose entire business model is built around eroding the competitiveness of brick and mortar stores, which is incredibly bad for social cohesion and the urban fabric. Yet the built environment the company itself has created in downtown Seattle is, at least on the surface, really first rate. Okay, more academic terminology. Data colonialism. Basically, the process by which governments, NGOs, and corporations take ownership of and privatize the exponentially exploding amount of data that is produced by humans just going about their day-to-day lives. The paper makes the case that urban spaces are not just the backdrop where datafication and extraction occur, but are themselves essential for both gathering data and extracting its value. A lot of the effectiveness of data colonialism depends on the very intentional granularity of urban neighborhoods like South Lake Union. The paper says, expanding storefronts and favoring small boutiques over big box retailers allows for more granular data on consumer preferences. A visit to a big box store creates one data point, while shopping at multiple specialized stores provides richer data on consumer tastes. If you read the paper, there's a whole section that they call a data walk where they run through a whole walking tour of South Lake Union with all their location services enabled and all their accounts logged in. And they get served basically a continuous stream of ads and offers for goods and services around the South Lake Union area, which I guess is either highly convenient or highly dystopian, depending on your perspective. I did not try to recreate this data walk, but the narrative in the paper is pretty amusing. I did actually use the Amazon Go store to buy some water, using the theoretical just walk out technology. I don't know what the latest is, but I still got very Mechanical Turk vibes from the whole experience. So by this point, I hope you've been convinced that walkability and bikeability in the area are very good, but transit is more of a mixed bag. South Lake Union doesn't have a stop on the Link light rail system yet, although Westlake Station is just a block outside the Denny Triangle. The area is very transit dense, including lots of private buses that connect from the various tech campuses to other parts of the metro area. I already mentioned the streetcar, but like nearly all of the buses in South Lake Union, it operates in mixed traffic, which a lot of times a day is kind of a recipe for disaster. Like, they need a flagger just to try to get the streetcar through this intersection at Thomas and Terry. Part of the issue here is, as much amazing urban design and livable streets infrastructure has been built in the area, South Lake Union is still bounded and bisected by some of the most heinous car infrastructure you'll see in the downtown of a major West Coast city. All of the problems flow from the fact that Interstate 5 was routed right through the heart of Seattle with a high density of on and off ramps, and that apparently dictates having high capacity roadways at the ramp terminals. So when you see an arterial that's designed the way Fairview Avenue is, or a street like Mercer Street that has a cross section as gargantuan as just about any suburban thoroughfare you'll find in the Puget Sound area, to me it's because we've never really grappled with the terrible planning decisions of the mid-20th century, which have had a disastrous domino effect on how downtown streets function, even in 2025 when I feel like we all actually know better. Probably the worst example of this is Denny Way, which experiences pretty horrific traffic eastbound toward I-5 in the afternoon and PM peak. I could make a whole other video about this, but let's talk about King County Metro's Route 8 bus, known locally as the Late 8 or just the Late, due to how poorly it operates much of the day, to the point where in July there was a Race the Late event where people turned out at a rally and hopscotched, walked, conga lined, leapfrogged, played songs on an accordion, and danced the cha-cha slide, which are all apparently things you can do faster on your way up Denny than the Route 8 bus actually goes. Now, where Denny Way passes through South Lake Union, you get this weird traffic configuration eastbound where the left lane continues over the I-5 overpass up to Capitol Hill, the right lane goes to an I-5 southbound on-ramp at Yale Avenue, and the center lane is bus only. So you might say, well, what's the issue? Well, things are great once the bus-only lane opens up at 9th Avenue, but west of 9th, the bus has to sit in traffic with all the single-occupant vehicles, which are legion. And apparently, the city has elected not to extend the bus lane further west because, say it with me, the model says we can't do it. I mean, we wouldn't want to further inconvenience people who choose to drive their car through the densest part of the city at the busiest time of day. Shame there's no way to incentivize more cooperative behavior. Okay, if you thought I was done ranting, well, you probably just don't watch this channel enough. A very quick reminder to click on all the things that help boost discoverability and lots of ways to connect on the apps. The events I'm doing in Chicago and San Diego and Seattle in the next few weeks, they're all sold out, but Patreon is the best way to stay up to date on stuff I'm planning for 2026. Okay, you wanted one more piece of terminology. Predatory inclusion, which is defined in the paper as the logic, organization, and technique of including marginalized consumer citizens into ostensibly democratizing schemes on extractive terms. This form of inclusion grants access to users in a way that facilitates the racialized consumptive preferences of hipster urbanism, while simultaneously devaluing the preferences or practices of the users whom they seek to gain access to. Look, I'm just giving this to you verbatim. Also, exclusion occurs through both displacement and the prioritization of wealthier users' data, validating a built environment tailored to their tastes. And you only have to go to Denny Park in the heart of the district to see this dynamic playing out in the most painful way. There are a lot of things in South Lake Union that are vastly improved from what they were 20 years ago, but it doesn't seem to lead to better outcomes for the most vulnerable people. Here's my last observation about South Lake Union, and take this with a grain of salt because I am an unreformed cat person. But can we just admit that dog-related platform urbanism is completely out of control? Is it out of line for me to point out that, especially in places like South Lake Union, we treat dogs better than we treat a lot of actual humans? I don't even just mean artisanal dog treats and doggy med spas. I also mean that we devote way more real estate and infrastructure to dog wellness and dog public hygiene than what humans get. And you will know this if you've ever tried to find a public restroom in the downtown of any major US city. And look, I'm actually a fan of good doggos in the urban environment, but we have got to figure out how to make sure humans are getting taken care of. I actually admire a lot of what's happened in South Lake Union since I moved away from Seattle 2 decades ago, but there's no doubt the benefits of all the improvements haven't been distributed equitably. I'm not saying there are easy answers. It's like a lot of stuff in urban planning. It's easy to craft a policy that benefits your city in the aggregate, but it's almost impossible to craft a policy that doesn't have any losers. And that can be okay, but I think South Lake Union is emblematic of a big problem we're facing, especially in our expensive coastal cities, which is that if nearly every policy you implement has the same losers every time, you can't be surprised when your city ends up with a lot of dysfunction. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support, which gives me the freedom to occasionally get a bit out of pocket like I did today, and talk about things that are not necessarily in my comfort zone, but I think are too important to ignore. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then. Look at these spiders out here. What the f are you doing? Get off my window. Get off my window, spiders.